Welcome to Faith, Love, and Therapy, a podcast to encourage and inspire. I'm your host, Jamie Johnson, a licensed clinical social worker committed to mental and spiritual wellness. Thank you for joining me as we peel back the layers of mental health from a faith perspective. Welcome back. This is episode 47, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about our narrative. So this came up. I recently participated in a podcast with a dear friend of mine, actually family. Her podcast will be called Single But Not Solo by LaWanna Wilson, and that'll debut on August 1st. And I actually had the opportunity to be a part of her first episode. And we talked about the stereotypes in relationships that keep people single. And so we were just sharing our perspective. There are a couple of different other therapists up there, some other podcasters, and just had a really good dialogue. But it reminded me of the conversation that I'm often having about our mental narrative and how we struggle to change that, because we were looking at how we're struggling to change the stereotypes that we have when it comes to dating, the dating world. And y'all know the stereotypes of what women are and what men are and that sort of thing, things that we're considering preferences. But this kind of, really rolled into the dialogue for me after the episode of, that's really attached to probably our narrative. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. You've heard me, if you've listened to the podcast in the past, I've talked about our mental narrative. And so just exploring that particular narrative, our mental narrative, remember that it's often something that's talked about, but it's difficult to do when we talk about changing that narrative. It is you'll hear therapists or other mental health providers talk about that all the time. How do we change the narrative? But it doesn't feel as simple to actually accomplish. It is more than likely because it's so unconscious. Sometimes we have these narratives that we live by, but we don't necessarily verbalize on a day-to-day basis. So it can be unconscious and we're just living it rather than really being aware of what it is. And because it's rooted in past issues. So our experiences have formulated these narratives about ourselves, about other people. And so we are walking them out on a day-to-day basis. So when we look at really changing a narrative, right, we want to look at kind of 4 areas. I want to focus on 4 areas or 4 steps. And this is a good episode to really take your journal out and kind of take some notes so you can prepare to do this for yourself. So when we talk about changing the narrative, we want to look at our first step really being to observe your pain points, right? Observe what triggers particular things in you, what experiences, I'll say it that way, tap into or trigger those pain points for you. So, every day we tell ourselves particular stories about work, about our home life, about our relationships, about our money, why we struggle with certain things, our health, our abilities. We tell ourselves things daily about those areas of our lives. And so typically the dialogue or the monologue is attached to a pain point if it's something that we're struggling with, right? And so we need to observe what our pain points are. That's the first step. Once you've been observing and noticed, okay, I keep tripping over this keeps hurting my feelings, this keeps upsetting me, this particular issue or feeling keeps coming up. Write all of that out. Write those different pain points out. And when I say write them out, I'm talking about the specific experiences that created that pain point. There might be more than one, right? So there might be one big one, there might be a major one that you need to write out, but there could be a couple of them that have fed that same pain point. So write those out. The second step after you have identified your pain points is to really look at the pattern, right? Look at the pattern of your behavior, of your response to your pain point. Look at the patterns in your life, right? If you notice some patterns within relationship, look at them. Kind of write down how things typically go with you when you're in a romantic relationship or in friendships or any type of relationship, really. Start to write the pattern that you see that you are engaging in, really not consciously. It's just kind of what you're the routine that you're in, right? Observe that. Take note of that. What are the patterns in my life that I continue to experience or continue to engage in? Habits. You want to think about habits, things that I continue to do. What are those patterns in my life? You're writing out those patterns that you see. Your third step is to rewrite the story, right? So when you see, we're taking the pain point and we're making a concerted effort to rewrite it, to change that particular perspective. And I think it's a good idea to actually write it out in your journal, how you could think about this particular pain point differently. And I'm going to give you an example to kind of bring this to life, but I want to give you the steps first. So we're rewriting the story about what you believe about money, the story, what you believe about yourself in relationship, the story about your health, the story about, your ability to be successful, your story about, being able to get a job, whatever the narrative, whatever the story is. I want you to work on rewriting that particular story so that the narrative is different, so that the story, it's almost like reimagining or re-envisioning that particular story. Like I said, I'm going to clear it up in just a minute. But the fourth step is then to anchor your beliefs in action. So now you have to take different actions to change that particular narrative, to change the pattern within your behavior. So we have observe the personal pain points, look for a pattern in your behavior, in your life, in your experiences, rewrite the story, and then anchor your beliefs in action. Do something, right? Do something different. And so I want to give you an example. I want to give you how I've worked through this for myself so that it can kind of bring light to how to do this, right? So I identified that one of my pain points, a lot of my pain points are connected to a period of time of significant bullying. And I've talked about it on the show, right? I've talked about, being bullied as a teenager, as a child, and how that's affected me. So I don't know that I've necessarily spoken about, or maybe I have, but my bullies were always Black males. So there was a narrative that began to develop surrounding Black males. And I developed a lot of insecurities with Black males as a teen and as a young adult, which led to me avoiding eye contact with them. I would literally, if I saw a group on campus, this was like my first year on campus. If I would see a group of guys just walking, or maybe they were sitting in a particular area, when I say I would take the longest route to avoid having to walk by them or through them, I would avoid a whole group of men, particularly Black men. And so I would avoid them because my expectation was to be laughed at, or something to be said about me, or to my feelings to be hurt in some way, right? So I would feel in my body like a significant level of anxiety, to the point that I would search for the exit. I would search for what other way I would go. And some of y'all, you know that I'm in Virginia. Some of y'all know the Norfolk State campus, and kind of in that middle area, there's a bunch of different sidewalks. When I say I would find the farthest sidewalk so that I did not have to walk near them or in between them, I would do that. And I did that, for at least the first 2 years while I was on campus. And so I was developing, that pain point was causing me to act differently because of the expectation that I was going to be hurt in some way. I was going to be, my feelings were going to be hurt. I was going to be bullied. I was going to be talked about. I was going to be laughed at. And so this experience created a narrative for me about how men viewed me, right? A narrative that said that I was, a joke, that I was unwanted, a narrative of rejection, right? So that is me identifying the pain point. Okay. So I want to give you a live example. Now, the pattern that I noted from that pain point is that I developed the pattern of avoiding, right? I developed the pattern of avoiding them. I would be anxious around them, or if I had to be in the presence of a group of men, or Black men, or even, it didn't have to be a large group. If I was in their presence, a lot of times I'd be very silent, right? I'd be very quiet. Didn't want to be seen. Didn't want anyone talking to me, because I expected something negative to come from that. And so that pattern started to develop, which fed the narrative that I was unwanted, right? Do you see how that's connected? If I am avoiding a particular group, I can continue to say that I'm being rejected by that group. It continues to feel like rejection, but really my habit is I'm avoiding them because of the narrative that I've developed. And so I truly wasn't allowing myself the opportunity to really engage with them. And so that contributed to me feeling the way that I felt. And so the next step would be to rewrite the story. And so I actually did this. I'm using an example that I have done. And I literally began to write my thoughts out in my journal. In this particular journal entry, it was a rather long entry, and it was intentional. I was intentionally wanting to rewrite the narrative that I had surrounding Black men. And so it was a piece that I called Reimagining the Laughter of Black Men. And it really turned into more like a poem that celebrated the laughter and what it meant and the joy that Black men have and can bring to my life, right? So I rewrote this narrative so that I could see another option, so that I can see a different perspective, that it wasn't just a negative perspective, or it wouldn't be a negative encounter, but I could see their laughter as joy. I could see their laughter as a symbol of love and something to be cherished, right? And so in my journal entry, I re-envisioned them in a way that made their laughter something great, something to be celebrated. And I changed it so that it was no longer a weapon that's used against me. So this is the journal entry that I made in order to rewrite my story. And then anchoring it in action, right? Because we can rewrite the story, but the feelings are still there. The experiences are still there. The fear is still there. And so what I literally started to do is I had to make myself walk by men. So I wouldn't allow myself to avoid. And when I say that the internal dialogue in order to do that was significant, I'm literally giving myself a pep talk in order to not avoid, right? In order to not be afraid, not to give in to that feeling of fear. And so as I started doing that, it takes a lot of practice. I'm not going to pretend that it's not difficult to change the narrative and to think differently, right? So I would start doing that, but I would also then work on actually looking at them and making eye contact and actually smiling. I would actually begin to speak and say hello, or, at least something, engage in some way. And I had to be strategic, right? Or not strategic, but intentional. I had to be intentional about that particular action. And still, even now, that is something that I'm very conscious of, is that I have a habit of looking down at the ground. I have a habit of avoiding eye contact when there's a group of people. I have a habit when there are men that come or walk beside me. I have a habit of not looking at them. And so that also feeds the narrative of being rejected, right? But I'm now on the other side of that. I'm now contributing to that particular narrative. So for me, in order to rewrite it or to anchor my actions, my belief in actions, I had to specifically tell myself every time I would go out, or if I'm in a group, to look up, to smile, to engage, and not to give in to that particular fear. So I want you all to take some time and think about your pain points. Think about how you're going to rewrite your narrative. My hope is that this made sense in a way that you can actually apply this particular strategy. And I'd love to hear from you to see how this process goes. I know that it's challenging, right? I know that it's difficult to just change how you think. And so that's why we want to look at the steps to actually walk yourself through changing a particular thought that started from one or maybe multiple pain points. So get your journal, play back this particular episode if you need to, so you can go through the 4 steps and be able to ask yourself the really hard questions and have this particular dialogue. I would love to hear from you and see how this went for you. You can connect with me on social media platforms. Let me know how this particular episode was useful or impactful, or if you say, Jamie, it did not work, I need some more help, I'd love for you to send me a message. You can email me, or you can touch base with me on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Faith, Love, and Therapy Podcast. I'm so glad that you took the time to listen in today. Pray that you have a great week. I'll see you next time on the next episode.